This episode is powered by Bandzoogle, the easiest all-in-one website platform for pro musicians and bands. You know who controls all your social media followers? Of course you do. Social media companies control who sees what and when they see it. Two things that will help ensure you're in control of your music business and your fan-based community are a website and an email list. Bandzoogle can help you with both. Plus, a solid website makes you look legitimate. Serious musicians, singers, songwriters, composers, and performers know this to be true. If you don't yet have your own website, check out Bandzoogle. It was created by musicians for musicians. I use it and I love it. It's as easy to use gets, and you don't have to worry about updates for things like plugins and security patches. Bandzoogle takes care of that for you. The features and support are both incredible. See for yourself. Go to bandzoogle.com to start your 30-day free trial. Use the promo code Robonzo to get 15% off your first year. Plans start at just $8.29 a month. That's bandzoogle.com, promo code Robonzo, ROBONZO, to start your free trial today. Let's do the show. This is The Unstarving Musician. I'm your host, Robonzo. On this podcast, I have conversations with independent music artists and industry professionals intended to help indie artists be better at marketing, business, the creative process, and all the other things that empower us to do more of what we love: make music. Would you like to help other independent musicians find this podcast? Subscribe on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast service. It really helps. The Unstarving Musician podcast is made possible through the generosity of listeners like you. One of the easiest ways to offer support is to join the Unstarving Musician community. Just go to unstarvingmusician.com and join right there on the homepage. As a member, you'll receive from me tips and lessons you can use in your music journey. And this isn't just coming from me and my years of experience as a gigging musician. It also comes from the wisdom of hundreds of other musicians I've talked to as part of the Unstarving Musician project and podcast. You'll also get a free copy of the Unstarving Musician's Guide to Getting Paid Gigs ebook, and that's all free just for being part of the community. To learn more about other ways of offering your support for the podcast, please visit our sponsor page at unstarvingmusician.com/crowd sponsor. Welcome to another episode, my little hothouse flowers. My guest is Rebecca Loebe. She's been a touring machine dating back to 2010, which of course came to a recent and abrupt pause during the early part of 2020, but she had wisely been building a loyal fan-based community on her own website and eventually on Patreon. We talk about the benefits of her community focus as well as her audio engineering pursuits, her home studio, a fun merchandising strategy that's paying off, pandemic gardening, and letting go of what no longer serves us. Rebecca was a serendipitous guest on this particular Friday. As I was having recording software issues, my usual recording software for these conversations crapped out on me a couple of days prior, and conveniently, Rebecca was able to help me do it by recording her voice track in her home studio while I recorded mine here in my home studio. A luxury I wish I had with more of my guests, but hey, it is what it is, man. Thank you for that, Rebecca. Here is me and Rebecca Loebe. So I'm going to try to do no editing, so we're just going to roll. You good with that?
Mm-hmm.
Lisa, thank you for joining me today.
Ooh, going to stop you right there. My name's Rebecca. It happens all the time because of the Lisa Loeb thing, but my name is Rebecca Loebe.
I am definitely putting that into the interview final. Rebecca, I'm so sorry. Just right
It's
after
okay.
the discussion of how to pronounce your name. That was amazing. Thank you for joining me. I really appreciate it. And we were talking about Patreon. We were about to talk about Patreon, and it was actually on my list to ask you about. It looks like you are working the art of community expansion there. How long have you been on Patreon?
I set my account up in the August of 2017.
Okay. Wow. So you've been there a while. And has our strange new world kind of, amplified what you're doing there at all? Or were you just sitting in a place where you're like, oh my gosh, I'm so happy I've been doing this since 2017?
Both. I mean, I started it in 2017 and I've been thrilled with it ever since I started it. I put a lot of effort into my launch strategy, which I'm happy to get into. I don't know how much detail you want to go into, but I think the weeks before and the weeks after you launch a Patreon are crucial. And I put a lot of work into that, and it was I think a successful launch. I had over 100 people on my Patreon within a week, which was more than I had expected and kind of what I had hoped for. And since then, it's been a really great source of extra income and business, boost and all of that. But it's also been an unexpectedly heartwarming community. It's sort of a gathering of all of the people who are the most enthusiastic about my music and helping me maintain my career. Therefore, it's just the whole thing just feels really encouraging, which is something I didn't expect. I thought it would just be, great to have some extra revenue, but I didn't realize how nice it would feel to have like a online congregation of the people who like my music most. So anyhow, when the lockdown started with COVID-19, I found myself kind of conflicted because on the one hand, all of my gigs had just been canceled, but on the other hand, everyone's gigs had just been canceled. So I didn't want to push too hard. I didn't want to be out there doing what my aunt so lovingly refers to as online panhandling. I didn't want to be out there, kind of drumming up support because I knew everyone needed that support. And I was, kind of backed away for a month or so. And the most incredible thing happened, which was dozens of people who have been following me on Facebook or on my newsletter for a long time and had never joined me on Patreon joined, or existing patrons increased their pledges without me asking. And that, now it's been, we're 8 or 9 weeks into this, and I'm starting to sort of gently poke at it and remind people that it's out there. But it was so nice to like take a little break from it and have that sort of heartwarming reminder that people care that I'm out of work.
That's nice. And so prior to jumping on Patreon, was there anything you were doing in terms of community building that compares or to what you have today with this?
Yeah, there were a couple of things. In 2010, I started a monthly subscription page that I just built on my website. A friend built it in HTML, and it had a PayPal subscription option. And I was offering live monthly bootlegs of shows. I'd get board recordings and put a little artwork with them and put them out every month. And that was sort of like a proto Patreon. And when Patreon first came along, I thought, oh, well, I don't need that. I run my own thing. But once my career started getting busier and busier, I realized that a lot of the back-end infrastructure that Patreon offers would be really helpful to me and take a lot of work off my plate that I was doing running my own subscription website. So in 2017, I gradually shut down the RebeccaLoebe.net subscription site I was running and transitioned over to Patreon. The other thing that I did probably about a year before that in 2016 is I started a Facebook group, and it's not a very big group. It's a private group. It's got just under 100 people, I think. And it started because I was having a hard time with my business and feeling, you just constantly feel like you're banging your head against the wall being a professional musician. And I asked on Facebook, like, do any of you guys want to help me? I need extra help, like getting the word out about this record. Is there anyone who'd like to raise their hand and come help me? I worded it more eloquently than that, I'm sure, but that was the basic gist. And, about 75 people responded in the comment thread, and it was more people than I could manage in a comment thread. So I started a Facebook group called Team Loebe. And the point of Team Loebe has been to help amplify posts when I need it. Like, for example, if I release a new music video, it's so helpful to have a lot of likes and shares and comments on a post like that in the first 5 or 10 minutes. Facebook uses that activity early on to determine how useful, how relevant a post is. And so the point of Team Loebe is I could say like, okay, everyone, here is a post I really need your help with. Please go comment, please go share. And then they'd all jump on it. And also they are sort of my biggest true believers, and they want to know about that stuff as soon as it's out there. So those were sort of two pre-Patreon things that I did in terms of community building.
I love that. Can you speak a little, maybe just give an example or two if you want, but as specifically as you like, can you speak a little bit to the infrastructure infrastructure part of the Patreon offering that you saw as such an advantage over something you were trying to manage yourself prior to joining?
Yeah, absolutely. So Patreon has mechanized all of the sign up activity. And they've laid it out in a way that I think is very appealing and easy for people to understand. They manage all the credit card stuff. They manage all the password stuff. They offer a really, safe experience in terms of, data encryption and whatnot. And then in terms of actually distributing the music. So for my website, I just put it up on the site and people had to know to come back and find it. And I had a few people say it would be great if we got an automatic email, or it would be great if we got a RSS, if there was an RSS feed option. The email I could do, it just required me, gathering everyone's email addresses and sending out a notice saying, by the way, I've uploaded a new offering. But, and there were other things like, for example, I would move my previous post down on the page, and that had to be done manually. So I would take the old content, move it down to the previous content slot, and then put the new content in. Just little things like that.
Yeah.
And now with Patreon, they have built in our RSS features. They automatically email your followers. You can choose to only email followers at certain tiers. You can choose to email followers at certain tiers a few days earlier. They archive all your previous posts. There's a tagging feature where you can say download, video, new song premiere, and then somebody can search the tag if they want to know all of the posts where there's an audio download. They click the download tag, and then it brings up all of the posts that I've ever put up that include audio for download. So those are just, and the thing too is that Patreon is cheap. I mean, I know it sounds like I'm a Patreon at this point. I'm not, but but they only take 5%. They take a 5% cut, and then an additional 4 to 6% for credit card processing. But everyone, you'd have to pay credit card processing on PayPal. So, I think that for 5% of your take, what they provide is actually pretty spectacular.
Yeah, that's cool. Definitely cool. I'd forgotten that rate is what it is. And
it's so low.
Yeah. I always think back to, I heard the founder, I think probably the first time I'd ever heard him speak was on a podcast at the Tim Ferriss show. And seems like a great guy. and certainly at the time, the vision, the product was new enough that it was pretty exciting, and still is. A lot of the artists that have been here on the podcast use Patreon and do it quite successfully. So thanks for sharing that. And then, I think you may have answered this, but you mentioned a couple times that you had this pleasant, heartwarming surprise, which may have been purely driven by the new circumstances of the pandemic and shut-in, and suddenly you're I know you are a big touring artist. What I don't know is how recently you have been super active in touring. So I don't know if that was just the faucet got shut off immediately for touring. But what I'm trying to ask is, can you elaborate a bit on what you meant by the heartwarming aspect? Was it one thing that you did mention was that there seemed to be a spike in contributions when the quarantine situation started to occur, or was there something else?
Well, so to unpack some of that, I am a pretty active touring songwriter. I play an average of 125 to 150 shows per year on the road, and have since 2009. And so I think a big part of Patreon for me is that I have gathered a lot of connections over that decade plus. So when I started my Patreon, it sort of created a gathering space for all of the different people who I had connected with over the years who felt an especially strong connection or kinship and wanted to become more involved. And yeah, the heartwarming thing I was mentioning in regards to Patreon is that I was just so pleasantly surprised that when the world shut down and I was too shy to ask for people to donate or increase their pledges, people who had known me for a long time and been following my music, completely unbeknownst to me, were moved to just, join or increase their pledge on their own. And I've also been working through the quarantine to connect a little extra with patrons. I think everyone's diving into the world of live streaming concerts, and I've been doing a few extra things for patrons. Like we had a tea party a few weeks ago, like on Zoom mid-afternoon.
Nice.
I did a after party after one of my live streams just for patrons, and that was really fun. And it was like I did a full concert on Facebook, Instagram, and followed it up with, okay, everybody, we're going to hop over, patrons, we're going to hop over to a patron after party on Zoom, which I thought
That's cool. Very exclusive. Yeah. I like it. So are you, with regards to touring, what is your sentiment right now on it? I would think you're like, can't wait to get back to it, but I'm just kind of curious. I know that we all go through a lot of emotion, internal dialogue with everything that's happening. How are you feeling about touring in the future?
Well, I'm looking forward to touring when it's safe to tour again. I love performing. It is my favorite part. There are lots of parts of this business that I enjoy. I love to sing. I love to write. I love to travel. I even enjoy the opportunity to use my creativity on some of the business challenges of operating a career. Like the whole thing is really inspiring and exciting to me. But the part that I love about it the most is standing on stage and communicating thoughts and feelings to people using music that I've written. It is such a powerful drug. Like that moment of transition when I take a song that I've written and it comes from my thoughts and my experiences and my emotions, and I sing it on stage, and it leaves my body and it enters the air and enters the ears of the people in the room, and suddenly they take it in and it becomes their song about their thoughts and their feelings and filtered through their life of perspective, and I'll never know what that song becomes once it enters that person's ears. And that to me is the magic that keeps me, sleeping in a hotel room 200 nights a year and away from my own bed and on the road and driving 50,000 miles a year. Like that magic of that moment of alchemy. However, I don't think, however addicted I am to the drug of performance, I don't think I can justify asking people to congregate when doing so is asking them to potentially risk their lives or the lives of their loved ones or the lives of my loved ones. So for now, I am making peace with the fact that it's going to be a long while until I'm able to perform on stage again. And I'm guessing there will be people performing on stage sooner than me. I think that there are bars and restaurants in some states that are opening up very soon that are starting to try and book performers as soon as this weekend, but it's not going to be me.
Sure. Yeah, I understand that and totally appreciate it. And, I guess I was wondering if the new way that you've been connecting with your fans on I'm assuming on a much more frequent basis and doing it this remote way, if it had changed your sentiment. It sounds like it has not changed your sentiment for performing, and I really love that. I probably don't speak enough about live performing, but certainly there's a variance among the different artists that I speak to as far as their love of it, their actual, how much they do it, their experience with it. But it did catch my attention that you have been a touring machine in your career as of late.
Why, thank you.
When you went into, actually, let me back up to one more thing that you mentioned. When you started the Facebook group, you admitted that you were a little down about your business, and you specifically mentioned the first thing that you were pleasantly surprised by was an ask, the response to an ask about helping you out. It sounds like specifically with the social outreach, but I was curious to know if were there other facets of the business that were giving you a tough time at that moment, and did you find that your community was able to help you with new facets of the business of your music that you didn't quite anticipate before doing it?
Yeah, I think that the initial impetus for that post was that I was about to release an album, Blink. It came out in 2017, and it was an album I was extremely proud of, but I had spent all the money that I had raised for it on creating the album, and I hadn't really saved much for publicity. So I was coming to terms with the fact that I was going to have to release it without any real meaningful publicity campaign, which was hard. That's not the advice that I would give someone, but it's the situation I found myself in. And I was reaching out to my community on Facebook, asking for help with all of it, with online promotions, but also kind of to be a street team to promote hometown gigs, to call into radio stations. And people were, as far as 80 people can be, they were incredibly helpful and incredibly enthusiastic. And it was really fun to have like a central place to make those asks. Honestly, that record campaign was so long ago now that I don't specifically remember how the initiatives of calling out to radio stations and things went. I do remember that there were pockets of people who were very helpful in getting larger groups out to concerts. And I was running some promotions such as, like create your own Facebook event, invite your friends out to dinner. And if anyone who brings 6 or more people to the gig will get, a free album, or a free album for everyone in your group, and things like that. And I do think I had some success with that, increasing my audience in towns where I hadn't played as much.
Very nice. Creative. Like that. Did that shortfall in funds, was that because of the experience that you had to this point, or just a miscalculation at that point in time? Just, something you knew better, but yeah, just the numbers didn't fall where you expected.
It was interesting because I did my fundraising on my own website, and I did it over a prolonged period. So I just kind of spent the money as it came. It wasn't I have X number of dollars and I'm going to allocate it thusly. It was like, okay, I have this many dollars. I'm going to spend it all on these basic sessions, and then I'll keep fundraising and spend that on the next round of expenses. And so I kind of just continually did that. And I got to a point where it was time to release the record. All the recording expenses had been paid, and I didn't have any money left for publicity. Now, if I were doing it that exact same way again, I would simply budget as I went, and I would have, I would probably split it 50-50, or maybe, 40-40-20, like save 40 for recording, 40 for publicity, and 20% for taxes in like 3 separate accounts.
It's a good strategy, I think.
And not start recording until the recording account had enough money to record in. Because then if I were to wait till that point, then the publicity budget would also have enough money in it to at least do some publicity.
Sure. Yeah. Okay, switching gears. I read that you pursued an audio engineering major at Berklee.
I did.
School of Music, Berklee College of Music. What was your primary motivation for pursuing that major?
Well, to be honest, I was a precocious teenager in the late 90s, and I wanted to be a famous rock star. And I watched a lot of VH1's Behind the Music, and I saw just a lot of sad stories about artists being taken advantage of in various ways, including by evil producers who manipulated their sound in the studio. And I thought, well, I can't let that happen to me. I'm going to study audio engineering and learn what all those buttons do, so that nobody can turn me into some crazy pop star if I don't want to be. So that was my initial motivation. And then I also figured it would be a good idea to have some sort of fallback career. So I will say that my reasoning for going into it was perhaps a little misguided, but I'm so glad that I chose that area to study. I can't really imagine what my life would be like if I weren't as comfortable in a recording studio and with recording gear as I am. I say that I'm sitting here in my home studio looking at my, at my setup that I've been beefing up since the lockdown started. And I just feel very, very comfortable in the studio environment. So even if that's all that I were to have received from that major, but I got a lot more from it because I became so completely sucked in to my studies as an audio engineering major that I, for a while, was pretty intent on pursuing a career as a sound engineer. And it was only when one of my engineering mentors from the department at school suggested that I try music first, because you can always come back to being a musician, but it's harder. You can always come back to being an engineer, but it's harder to come back to being a musician later in life.
Sure.
So I figured that was good advice. I mean, that really resonated with me. So I dove into it, and I haven't dove out.
Nice. Have you, by and large, been your own engineer, producer, or co-engineer, co-producer because of that field of study, or has it just been more of a companion because you understand what's going on in those particular legs of making records?
Well, both. It's definitely impacted my approach to recording. In terms of self-producing, self-engineering, like I'm happy to self-engineer all of my demos at home. I don't self-engineer my records, and I don't really self-produce, except to say that my version of being an artist in the studio working with a producer is very similar to other people's version of co-producing. I just choose not to take a co-producer credit because I feel like part of the producer's reward for putting up with me and for being a producer is the producer credit. So I don't take partial credit for producing. But I am super involved. And I think honestly that a good producer is in the studio with the intention of expressing the artist's vision and helping bring an artist's vision to life in a recording. So that's how I've always approached it, is that I work as an equal with a producer who then we work jointly to articulate and express my vision on the recording. But I have heard other people tell me that that's actually co-producing.
I was going to say spoken like a producer. No, I don't, and I don't fully understand the world of it, but I just was real curious to know the beginnings of your pursuits in audio engineering and certainly how it's affected your career and your creativity and all that.
Interesting story about that. When I first graduated from college, I got a job as a Pro Tools editor and session engineer at a recording studio in Boston, which is where I went to school. So I worked there for a year and a half. It was sort of seasonal because it was freelance. They'd have some seasons where they were super busy, other seasons where there wasn't work for a few weeks or months. And I would, pick up hours at the Whole Foods where I was also working as a cashier.
Mm-hmm.
But then other seasons where they were slammed with tons of projects and I would be working 60 hours a week at the studio. And while I was working at the studio, I struck up a deal with my boss where he let me come in on the weekends and in the evenings and record myself demos. I would record, other instrumentalists, percussion players, bass players playing along with me. And that first collection of demos became my first record, which is called Hey, It's a Lonely World. And that was the only record of mine that I've produced, and it was recorded partially at the studio. So several years went by, and I was starting to try and tour, and I needed to record my next full-length record, and crowdfunding wasn't really a thing yet. And I mean, it was being done underground, but there weren't any websites like Kickstarter or GoFundMe. If you can believe that, there used to be a time where we didn't have websites designed to ask all of our friends and family for money.
I remember.
Yeah. So back in those days, independent artists were doing sort of a proto version of crowdfunding where they would build their own websites, which I did, and send out letter campaigns like NPR with self-addressed stamped envelopes. Please send a check back to me here, Aunt Mildred. Thank you. And I did that for my first record, but I didn't have much of a crowd to fund from. So I also needed to find other ways to pay for this record. And one of the things I did was work at my producer's studio part-time for a year. And this is in Atlanta, a different studio. He was a music producer, and I would work, his name's Will Robertson. He's been involved in most of my records. And I would work for him as an assistant engineer or engineer sessions where he was playing bass and couldn't physically engineer it, or go to him for offsite recordings, or clean out the microphone closet at his studio, or do a lunch run, or, just run any errands he needed. And over the course of a year, we tallied up all the hours that I spent helping, and we bartered for time. And that was a huge part of how I was able to get my first record, my first big record that wasn't demos, Mystery Prize, recorded and out into the world. And it also really helped me develop a close relationship with Will, with the producer, because by the time we started recording my album, we had been working together in the studio for like a year. We had inside jokes, we had a great working rapport, we had all the things you hope to have on your last day of recording an album with somebody.
Nice. It's a good story.
Oh, thanks.
Tell me about your home studio.
Oh, well,
and I'd love to know how it began and where it is today.
Well, the problem with technology is that it keeps growing and shifting and breaking and becoming outdated 10 minutes after you've bought it and all of that. So for many years, my home studio was I think a MacBook, or like one of those old white Mac laptops, and an M-Box. I don't even think they make M-Boxes like this anymore. And then I had Pro Tools on my computer. And that was back before Pro Tools had made a dongle. So in order to edit files on Pro Tools, you had to have it plugged into an interface, and the smallest interface they had was the M-Box. So I was touring and lugging my M-Box all over the country, even though all I really needed to do was edit sessions for my bootleg series. So I remember one day I was on an airplane, and I had my M-Box in my purse in between my feet and the cable going up to my laptop, and I was editing, and somehow or another a water bottle turned upside down in my purse, and my M-Box got completely fried. And so that was the end of my M-Box for a while. And then that computer got outdated, and then I got a new MacBook Air. And for several years, I didn't have any real recording gear, and I was just recording all at other people's studios. And if I really had to do something, I'd use GarageBand. And GarageBand is fine, but since I used to, work full-time as a Pro Tools editor, I'm just so comfortable in Pro Tools that I don't love using other DAWs. So anyhow, then there's this wonderful business in Austin called Rock and Roll Rentals, which rents out audio and music equipment very cheaply. So whenever I needed to record something, I'd go and rent an interface from Rock and Roll Rentals. And that gave me a chance to try a bunch of different interfaces. And I really like the Apogee Quartet, and I really like the United Audio Apollo and that series. They have a bigger one than the Apollo. Duo, Apollo. Yeah, the Duo is the Apogee and the Apollo is the UA. So I really liked them both. I liked the UA. I went back to rent it again, and it was out, so I rented the Apogee Quartet again. And I liked it, and I kept it for a really long time, and it got to the point where when I went to go return it, they said, well, you've had it for so long at this point, you should just pay us a few $100 more, and then you'll own it. And so that's what I did, and that's how I started up my studio again. So I've got an Apogee Quartet. I record into a Mojave MA200, which is a large diaphragm condenser microphone that I've really been a huge fan of for years. I've used it for my last couple of albums, and I always use the one at the studio where I work. They had bought one. Actually, they bought one because I loved it so much. And then I also used to borrow one from my dear, sweet, kind friend Bruce, who would lend me his microphone for months on end. But now that we're in the COVID-19 era, I didn't want to borrow or rent a microphone. So I saved up my pennies and bought one for myself. So I'm very excited to have a decent microphone. I've got I think it's called a Stedman pop filter, which is like a large metal pop filter. I'm not using it on this podcast, so you might hear some plosives in this recording. Sorry about that. I've got a few boom stands. I've got a good pair of Sony headphones and a headphone extender and a splitter if I'm ever allowed to have anyone else over to record. I have a pair of Yamaha HSM5 monitors. Honestly, I used to have a pair of KRK V6s, and one of them was broken, and I gave them away in a moment of weakness. They'd been broken for a long time. I hadn't found anybody to fix them. I thought, you know what, I was downsizing. I'm going to just send these to Goodwill. Somebody will tinker with them and get them working again, and I'll buy some more later. And then I realized I'd gotten those in college a really long time ago. And then when I went to replace them, I realized they cost $600 each. So I really regret giving those to Goodwill. I hope somebody's putting them to good use. And now I have a much less expensive pair of Yamaha HSM5s. I've got, a few acoustic guitars, an electric guitar, some pedals. And that's pretty much my studio for now. My next purchase is going to be a pair of Rode and T5 stereo mics, because I find that when I'm doing videos, I like to have a big stereo pair, those Rhodes up off camera, and then just one condenser mic in front of me.
Well, I want a picture when you get the new setup.
All right.
Sounds great. Wow, that's cool. And it seems it had humble beginnings. I was, imagining it's always been this amazing, just because of your whole audio engineering background. But, I'm reminded that there's a lot of money to be sunk into a home studio, aside of all the education.
And the frustrating thing is that it's not like you buy it once and then you have it. It's like you buy it once and then you have it for a few moments until there's a new operating system, and that operating system doesn't work with your software, and this software doesn't work with that interface. And then you have to just keep continually buying things, and you can't sell what no longer works anymore.
Right. As soon as I was telling you, I bought Pro Logic and new audio interface, and I knew as I was doing it that my MacBook Pro circa, what is this thing? Mid 2014 is going to have a limited lifetime with these software components.
Right. Well, and the good news is that you could get a used Mac Mini from like 2016, and that would work perfectly fine. And those aren't too expensive, and it's like I'm trying to get to a point where especially now that I'm homebound, where because I've been a laptop person for 15 years, but I've transitioned to having an iMac that I use as my dedicated recording machine, and freeing up my MacBook Air to be my traveling word processing, photo editing, web surfing machine, but not, because I think the less heavy lifting I try and do on my laptop, the longer it will live. That's just a theory.
Well, and I suppose you have a little more expansion capability in theory with the two devices, depending on what they are, for your studio. Tell me about the coloring books for Mystery Prize and Blink.
Yes, absolutely. So when Blink was coming out, that was the record that I released in 2017. And up to that point, all of my albums had been self-released. And I had desperately wanted to record vinyl, to print vinyl for that record. But as I mentioned, I ran out of money. And vinyl is incredibly expensive to print. So I wanted, one of the things that appeal to me about vinyl are I'm an audiophile, so I really love the sound of vinyl. I never gave up having a record player. I love spinning vinyl. B, I think that a lot of people don't have CD players anymore, and so they don't have a use for a CD, but they will purchase something that includes an audio download. And C, I think that people really like having a souvenir from the show. But if people can't play CDs anymore, you need to offer souvenirs that aren't CDs. So that was those were where my brain was spinning, and why I wanted to print vinyl, because people will buy vinyl just because it's big and pretty, even if they don't have a record player, which is kind of crazy.
Right.
So I was dead set on printing vinyl, but I ran out of money. So I had this idea for a coloring book. It was 2017. There was a big coloring book craze. And I just thought it would be really fun. I hired an artist in Austin to make a line drawing for every song on the record, which was cool because for him, it's an illustration, but it's kind of an easier type of illustration because he doesn't have to do any of the coloring. So he made a colorized version of the cover of the record. That was the cover of the coloring book, and then just black and white line drawings to go with each song, and he set lyrics to go opposite the illustration. And then we printed it. I was holding it in my hand thinking, okay, how much do people charge for coloring books? Like, I spent X number of dollars on the illustrations, X number of dollars on getting them printed. I need to be able to charge more than like $7 for this. Plus, I don't want to have an item on my merch table that's that cheap because I don't want to undercut my other items. So I thought, how can I get away? I really backed into this, is what I'm saying. I thought, how can I get away with charging $15 for a coloring book? Oh, I know. I'll put a download code in the back of it. So it became like at the 11th hour, right before the tour started, I went to bandcamp.com and set up, it's very easy to set up individual password protected download codes for albums. So I bought, 200 or 300 download codes for the record, and they're like 2 cents each or something, 3 cents each, and printed them all onto Avery sticker notes. So I made like a, on the Avery 8160 label, it was like, thanks for buying the coloring book. Click here to download the album. And then I just copy pasted individual codes into each sticker and then printed those out, put them in the box of coloring books. And then as I was on the road, as I went, I would sticker the back of the coloring books with the download code. And that is how I ended up with coloring books. And they were a big hit. I mean, they sell every show. People buy coloring books. Plenty of adults love to color. Kids love to color. People love to support, even if they don't have a CD player anymore. So that's been very nice. And then when I was re-releasing Mystery Prize, the Acoustic Sessions record, it's called I re-released my album Mystery Prize from 2010. I wanted to celebrate that record in particular because that's right around the time I started making a full-time living as a musician. It's when that record came out, and that record brought a lot of really great opportunities into my life, including, getting a record deal in Europe for that album, getting invited to participate in the first season of The Voice, and just suddenly being played on the radio and all sorts of things. So I wanted to celebrate that particular record's 10th anniversary. So I recorded acoustic versions of 6 songs from that album and put those together into an EP called the Mystery Prize Acoustic Sessions, which I released as a Noise Trade feature in March, and also released in a newly made Mystery Prize coloring books, which, by the way, I ordered 100 of them, and they arrived at my house right before the pandemic started. So if anybody would like to buy 100 coloring books, I'll make you a real nice price.
Let's make sure we shout that out in your episode and the notes and stuff. So that's cool.
I haven't actually gotten my act together. I should redecorate my the web store on my website and put together some kind of bundle with the coloring books. I've just been, I think everyone's handling the pandemic a little differently, and I am really not so concerned with being like the best or most creative lockdown singer-songwriter of all time. I'm really just trying to take good care of my body and my brain and get through this time safely and sort of do the maximum amount of self-care I can do and as much career stuff as I need to do to still feel healthy and balanced and satisfied with my life, but not like knock myself out. So there's a lot of stuff, a lot of ideas I have about ways I could be maximizing this time that I'm just not doing.
I relate. My wife and I live in a beach resort community, and we were walking this morning as we do with our dog, and I was reminding myself to, months prior, I was always in a hurry to get back and start my day, and more lately, I'm just enjoying the time and realizing everything's going to be waiting aside of any hard set appointments I have, or maybe an interview on a Friday morning or something. Everything else is going to be waiting for me when I get there, and I just don't feel I'm quite as rushed. And I do recognize, like you said about yourself, that it's just something we have to do to take care of ourselves.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Speaking of which, are you still planting flowers, or is that super new that you discovered you enjoy?
I have been gardening. I had gardened once before, many years ago, in one of my first homes in Austin. I had a wonderful landlord who had been cultivating this beautiful property for 30 years, and I mentioned to her that I might want to start a garden sometime, and she woke up the next morning at like 6 a.m. and started hoeing a little patch outside of our bedroom window near the house, and thought, well, now I definitely have to garden. So back then, this is
Sweet.
2011, 12, I put together a little square foot garden, and I would grow lettuce and kale and, beets and carrots and things like that. And it would be so exciting because I'd put them in the ground and I'd water them and I'd leave on tour and I'd come back and they'd be a little bigger. And whenever I was home, I could eat a salad with things that I'd grown in my own yard. It was really satisfying. And then I moved to my second place in Austin and set up my square foot garden, planted it, watered it, left on tour, and came back and everything was dead. And I realized, oh, my landlord at the old house was watering everything for me while I was on tour. Cool. Maybe I'm not the master gardener that I thought I was. So I haven't been gardening for many years, but now that that I'm home, at the very beginning of the pandemic, it meant right away that months of my shows were canceled. Like before people even knew what was going on with the summer, all of my shows in April and May had to be canceled because I was supposed to be traveling to the UK and Europe, and it just didn't make sense. So I went. The last errand I ran on like March 13th when I went and did a big sweep, grocery store, post office, all that stuff. I went to a plant store and bought a bunch of vegetable starters and came home and gathered all of the pots and containers that I had all over my house and got them all together in the courtyard and planted them all. And I was calling it my pot garden for a while. And then a friend was like, I think, Becca, you should use the term container garden. Oh, okay. So my container garden, it's very cute. And yeah, I'm growing stuff. It's really fun. I mean, it's I'm not the most productive gardener, farmer lady of all time. It's given me a whole new level of respect for the people who grow our food. Because I'll say that it's taken months of labor, twice a day waterings, multiple fertilizing sessions, and I've grown like 2 cucumbers and 8 tomatoes. So, I have a whole renewed appreciation for the people who do it, but it's also kind of a meditation. It's, I wake up, I take care of these things. I do have some eggplants growing. I've never watched an eggplant bloom before, but it, developed these beautiful purple flowers a couple weeks ago. And then those flowers have turned into shiny, dark purple eggplant skins that are growing every day. So it's been exciting. It's been a nice change of pace for me.
A labor of love and mindfulness, no doubt.
Absolutely.
Okay, I want to be respectful of your time, but I did want to ask you about a quote that I think I garnered off your website. I want to read it and then just hear your thoughts on it. Oh no, what did I write? No, you'll know this one. I'm trying to encourage everyone to let go of what no longer serves us, to stand taller, walk lighter. We can't outrun our past, but we get to decide who we are and what we will let define us.
Yeah, I did say that. So a lot of the songs on my most recent album, Give Up Your Ghost, were written in a few-month period in the fall of 2017 when I was really working through some stuff in terms of balancing my career, my ambition, my role as a human, as a sister, as a partner, as a woman in the world. And I realized I wrote several songs of comfort, including the song Ghosts, most specifically, that were just me telling myself that it's okay and that I just have to let go and accept that it's all going to be all right. It's going to be hard, and that I am strong enough to get through what I'm facing, but that I have to relax and not beat myself up or overwork myself quite so hard. So it's a pretty specific message, but I wrote several songs kind of along that theme, and they really resonated with audiences, and they really resonated with me. And I think that when a song really resonates with the singer brings a certain energy to an audience. And that was sort of the message of that record was that, we're, it's sort of self-affirmation jam.
Yeah, that's great. I love it. I
guess I just figured I couldn't be the only person who needed to hear that.
Of course not. Yeah. very funny. I heard something that reminded me of a little piece of your quote just this morning from Sam Harris.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of captured the first line of your quote there about, letting go of, in the case of the conversation I was listening to with him, it was about fear, but letting go of it when it no longer serves us. And I was like, well, look at that. She wrote this lovely thing on her website, so I wanted to talk about it. So I want to say, Rebecca, thank you again. I was listening back to a bit of your music, reflecting on however I came across you online, and reminded of what an amazing talent you are, particularly vocally. And I just this morning watched, I don't know how many videos there are of your voice appearance, but I watched your cover of, I believe it's Come As You Are.
Oh, yeah.
Which was amazing. I hope you don't mind if I include a link to that in the show notes for our conversation. And lastly, thank you for helping me with the recording of today's episode, given that I was in a bit of a pickle when I called you.
Well, I think that you got it all figured out on your own, but it was my pleasure to be there for you.
Well, I appreciate it. It was wonderful talking to you.
Thank you so much for thinking of me. I look forward to hearing this when it comes out.
And you will. This episode was powered by ConvertKit. More than just an email marketing company, ConvertKit is focused on landing pages too, giving beginner creators everything they need to start building their email list. I've been a ConvertKit user since early 2016, and I love it. Their new free plan allows creators to make unlimited landing pages and forms. With ConvertKit, you can choose from multiple templates, add personalization and design, include an incentive email, create thank you pages, manage subscribers, and send broadcast emails. The support and educational resources offered by ConvertKit are top-notch too. That's important to me. It should be to you as well. To learn how ConvertKit can help you connect with your audience so that you can make a living doing the work you love, go to unstarvingmusician.com/convert or look for the link in the show notes for this episode. If you have feedback, questions, comments, suggestions about the podcast, my guests, me, please visit unstarvingmusician.com/feedback. You can leave me a quick voicemail right there on that page, right from your browser. All my other contact info is there too, and I'd love to hear from you. Find links for just about everything talked about in this episode at unstarvingmusician.com/podcast. Thank you for listening and sharing with your friends. Peace, gratitude, and a whole lot of love.